Welcome back, everyone, to week 2 of Water in Communications. I'm Cécile Pilon-Hugh, and I'm super happy to welcome you back for this week. The Water in Communications program is supported by the Grundfos Foundation, and I really want to thank Anne Bisgaard Christensen and Virginia Newton-Lewis from the Grundfos Foundation to make this program happen. As usual, for all of us to hear each other and to communicate with each other in the language of our choice, I encourage you to activate the interpretation at the bottom of your screen. You should see a little globe icon. It can also be located under More. So check that, and then you can choose English, Spanish, or Arabic, and we have our interpreters today to help us communicate and hear each other properly. While you do that, I also wanted to remind you that we have this Google Drive link that I shared with you in an email yesterday. Well, you will find the PDF program with all the sessions, as well as the slides from last week, and also summary of the discussions that happened in the chat. So these summaries are basically recapping everything that was shared in the chat from the participant perspective. So if you have resources, links, tips that you think are beneficial for this community, please do add them in the chat, and we will make sure to capture them in the notes, and then we can build on each other's expertise that way. If you cannot access the Google Drive, please email me. I won't be able to keep track of everything in the chat, so if you can send me an email at cecile.hue, H-U-E, at ciwi.org, then I'll manage to share the resources with you in another way. Right. Oh, and the recordings will be ready soon. We had some technical issues last week, but they will be ready in the next few days on the World Water Week YouTube channel. Speaking of World Water Week, the program is now out. So you can check it out at worldwaterweek.org, and I really encourage you to sign up. Of course, if you cannot be with us in Stockholm, participation online is free, and you can still have access to all the content, all the sessions, and all networking and online exhibitions. So you can really make the most out of the week, even online. So really encourage you to get your tickets today to start connecting with other participants. All right. Yeah, as we get started, I just want to have a room check. How are you feeling today? If you want to type in the chat which photo you feel you relate most today. Like, are you calm and peaceful, or more stormy? Is it like jumping all around or all over the place? Whatever you feel, the photo that matches how you're feeling, please enter that in the chat. Right, and while we do that, I'm going to introduce today's session. So I would like to welcome Seyifunmi Adebote, who you've heard before, on top of being a crucial help in this Water in Communication series with his technical and strategic expertise. Shay has over 8 years of experience as an environmental and communications practitioner. His work spans from environmental policy, communications, international diplomacy, and multimedia strategy. Shay also hosts the Climate Talk podcast and the Green Bites Wednesdays, where he speaks with environmentalists, activists, and development experts to broaden climate knowledge globally. And Shay will be moderating the panel today. So Shay, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Cecile. That was quite a mouthful. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're truly honored to have you with us. And it's my pleasure to moderate today's session. It's the third of 8 sessions. First, we had, Maggie White and Joseph Pablo set the pace for us, introducing us to what it is when we talk about water in global conversation. And that was followed up by a very practical workshop where Georgette helped us understand how do we move from buzzword to impact. And today, as we move on with this session, I am so fortunate to have an incredible lineup of professionals, journalists, strategists, media practitioners from all over the world, who are actively shaping how water stories are being told. And it's really, I would say today's session will be empowering. So come, with a very open mind to listen, but also to ask questions, because there's going to be quite that session where we get to interact and get your questions, particularly through the chat. Whenever we talk about food or conflict or health or climate issues, there is a red line that sort of ties through all of this, and that is water. Usually, water is at the center of these conversations. Unfortunately, it rarely makes that headline. And this stresses the need for journalists, for communicators, storytellers, wherever you find yourself in the puzzle or as part of the puzzle, it means we all have to understand how to tell meaningful water stories. And that's the focus of the conversation today, how to tell meaningful water stories. In no particular order, I would like to introduce our guest for today. I'll start with Kama Abu Sharif. She is a climate and environmental journalist and a media development consultant. She's been working in the Middle East and North Africa, the MENA region, and she brings insights from this region to the conversation today. She also led an extensive research, which I read very recently on DW, that sort of speaks to the challenges that environmental journalism faces across 7 different countries. We're really, pleased to have you with us today, Kama. Welcome. Do you want to say hello?
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction. Happy to be here.
Great, thank you. And from the Middle East and North African region, we move to Uganda in East Africa, where we have Frederick Mugari. Frederick Mugari is a Uganda-based water and geo-journalist. He founded the Water Journalists Africa organization, which runs InfoNile, a geo-journalism initiative that fosters cross-border collaboration in the Nile Basin. As part of the Nile Well program, he also coordinates the InfoNile project. Welcome, Frederick. We're really pleased to have you with us today.
Thank you so much.
Great. Moving away from Uganda, we're also very pleased to have with us Jennifer Gonzalez Posadas, as well as Alejandro Melgoza from Mexico. They are the producers of the documentary The City Without Water. And I also saw the article that sort of accompanied that documentary, where they exposed how unchecked urban development in Mexico City that was being led by powerful real estate trusts and enabled by government inaction was causing serious harm to local communities and indigenous towns. They also sort of put in focus residents and how water shortages was changing their life and what that meant. Jennifer, Alejandro, hola and welcome. We're so pleased to have you with us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation.
Great. Thanks indeed.
Thank you.
Great. And welcome again. And just arriving from Angola and Chad, she's been quite busy lately, so we're so pleased that she can join us today, is Angelica Ojuele. She works with Doctors Without Borders. She's worked in the emergency humanitarian sector for over 15 years and has been part or sort of at the center of many medical outbreak and conflict zones with various organizations from different parts of the world. Currently, she's one of the environmental health advisors with Doctors Without Borders, where she gives technical and strategic support in countries that have acute emergencies: Sudan, Palestine, Angola, Latin American region, specifically in Brazil and Venezuela. Angelica, welcome. We're so pleased to have you with us.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
It's our pleasure indeed. Not the least is Steve Kubate. Steve Kubate is a chartered PR practitioner and media specialist who's working with Practical Action UK. And there he leads the organization's media global efforts. When he does not, work on, when he does not directly manage or currently does not manage the Tokena project in Kenya, but he also leads a media team that has secured coverage on platforms like Bloomberg TV, and where they highlighted the work that Practical Action is doing. Steve, we're so happy that you could join us. I know you had some troubles with mobility and connection, but good to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you, Say. I'm very excited to be here.
Great, thanks indeed. So, like I said earlier, when I gave the introduction, most times when we talk about water issues, we sort of frame it under issues like climate and food and health without sort of putting the spotlight on water. And this is where I would like to start off this conversation with. I'll turn to you, Karma, to say, in your recent publication, which I had a chance to look at, I saw how you engaged journalists in the Middle East and North Africa region about the most important aspect when it comes to covering climate change. Now, if you had to narrow down the outcomes from that conversation to the water section or the water sector, what would be your outlook on the state of water journalism in our world today?
Right. Well, I think the water sector in the MENA region is a reflection of the serious challenges and opportunities faced by water journalism today. The MENA region is one of the most water scarce regions in the world. And the projections do not look good. So we're seeing rising temperatures, we're seeing increased water stress, meaning less water for people and farms, rising sea levels that threaten coastal areas. The projection by the IPCC is that by the end of 2025, an additional 80 to 100 million people will face serious water shortages in this region. Groundwater is being overused beyond what nature can replace, and coastal cities and villages are under risk of flooding, threatening the lives of millions of people, up to 6 million, according to their report. But despite all these serious realities, water coverage, unfortunately, in this region, by the media across the whole region, is still very limited and superficial. I mean, this can, we did an extensive research, and this can be attributed to lots of factors, but really mainly many journalists lack the right training and access to reliable information and data to tell these stories properly. Water stories tend to come out only when there's a weather disaster or an international conference, and rather than an ongoing coverage of a serious water problems or solutions. Also, many water stories, or most water stories, are a translation from foreign sources, which can miss the local context and risk telling the story in a language that the target audience wouldn't understand. Therefore, making it harder for these communities to relate to these issues. Now, the media plays a very important role here. It can raise awareness, it can put pressure on governments or decision makers, and it can also inform the local communities about what's happening and how they can adapt to it. Showing real stories of how water shortages are impacting daily lives, especially the vulnerable population, and sharing solutions that have worked elsewhere can really inspire action and prepare the communities for what's to come, what we know is coming.
We'll get to that in a bit. What to come? What has been the practicalities of people and the conflict and how to handle that. But you've set a very clear background when it comes to the water outlook, and I really appreciate this. You talked about how it's still superficial. It's like we're still scratching the surface when we talk about water journalism. And this is where I'll turn quickly to Frederick to build on your response. And I know, Frederick, you work with the network of water journalists across Africa, and you engage with water journalism as a sector. Sort of building on what Karma said around this water journalism still being superficial, she also talked about the lack of the right training to tell the stories properly. How do you, how do we reach people who lack this access, who do not have this training, both in terms of documenting their realities, but also presenting them with the information that empowers them to do better?
Yeah, thank you so much. I like the fact that Kama talked about the issue of water stories affecting more the local communities, the rural, for example, the rural communities. If you look at Africa, most of these water stories affect the rural communities. And you don't see these stories in the mainstream. You see probably a few buried, inside newspapers, but you don't see so many. And that's the question. It goes back to what you have asked. How do we reach out to these communities that are hard to reach? For example, for us as an organization, we have tried so many ways. For example, we have implemented a model that takes back stories to where they are made. Because we believe that these stories do not live in newspapers where they're made. For example, in newspapers or TV, they live in communities where they are made. So you do like an exhibition. You exhibit these stories. Journalists write these stories, they print them, you have them in newspapers, but you take back these stories to communities where they are made. And people look at themselves in these, their stories. They look at the photos, for example, that you exhibit in rural communities, and they will be like, I didn't know. I didn't know I was giving good stuff to you journalists. Please come back, I give you more. So that way, it becomes participatory. You have the local communities coming back to the stories. But also, you may need to think about inclusive journalism. The journalism, not about people, but journalism for and with the people. The rural communities, going to the communities, making sure that you involve all these communities. You have voices from the communities, the marginalized, the persons with disabilities, not only the corporates, the big companies that are transnational, but all the people that are affected. Remember, as we said at the beginning, most people who are affected by these stories are the rural communities, and they want to be in the stories. So you need to reach out to them. And so you can do that when you do inclusive journalism. There is a new term that I think we can also adapt into journalism. Allyship. So if it is possible, we can do allyship journalism. So then we go directly as journalists to communities and make sure that those communities, those people, those voices that are marginalized, we intentionally bring them to the limelight in our stories, the stories we write. So then we hear them, what they're talking about, we write about their issues, so bring everything in the limelight. You see, we do that to make sure that the policymakers know these issues and take informed decisions based on rural communities' feelings and reactions and how they want things to be, but not just politicians who sit in offices and take decisions on behalf of the communities. Well, the last one, probably, which we have tried also, and we think it works. If you did like a photo voice, and you gave cameras to rural communities, and to tell their stories, to take photos of their stories, their feelings, and bring out these stories to you as a journalist or the media has, they would actually tell bigger and better stories than journalists do. It's a model that is done in science, in research, but if you did it also in journalism, it would give you great stories. Yeah.
Interesting. And you did, first, I learned a lot when you talk about allyship journalism. It's a new term for me, I get for many people, but I get the point of sort of building allies with the people on the ground and using that to then report what you put out as a journalist. But you also talked about inclusive journalism, and I see in the chat people talking about different groups, members of women in water and sanitation and youth groups, and it's around capturing these different voices and seeing that you don't just sit and through your own lens as maybe
Yeah.
one aspect, write the story for a broad group of people. One of the
That's
things
right.
that from your introductory remarks was around participatory storytelling. We'll come back to that in a bit to build on that. But I wanted to just turn the mic to Angelica. And I'll connect this to the point you raised around intentionality, that we need to reach out to them. And this is the work that Angelica does. Angelica, I know that you work with Doctors Without Borders, and you recently just came back from Angola and Chad, where, in the words of Frederick, you were reaching out to them. So can you just give us an outlook of what it is like when you're in this community, and who really owns the story? When you come back after all of the practicalities on the ground, what do you see as, how do you frame the stories? Who owns the story when you report it? And the second part of the question would be around, what are some dignifying ways to report projects or to report things that happen in such communities? We understand how the media could also shape how people think about these things. So when we think about ethical journalism, dignifying, true journalism, what are some dignifying ways to talk about what is happening on the ground, but still put that humanity part in our storytelling?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sei. So I think who is responsible, or who's the story for? I think everyone, even the reader, at the end of the day, will own the story. All of us have a different point of view on different situations. So at the end of the day, we all become owners of the story. But I think for us who are on the ground, and for those who are communicating on the story, it's extremely important that we speak, as my previous colleagues just mentioned, we hear the story from the beneficiary themselves, so that they can also have a chance to express what their situation is and how they see their situation. I think that's very important, to hear from the people themselves. And then, of course, it really depends on the story, like who you're targeting, who your audience is, what's the objective of the story. Because I would say that for a communication article to be effective, it's also very important to state, okay, this is the problem, but then this is the solution that we can bring in. Because sometimes and I'm not accusing all comms, but sometimes the comms, communications article, etc., targets says, oh, there's no water. But okay, there's no water. You're reaching to donors, you're reaching to different types of audiences. So what can be a solution for that water? So here I would say that in communications, it's very important to also include your technical advisor in environmental health or in water that can actually say, okay, yes, say this is an issue, this is a problem, but let's bring in what type of solution we promote that can then bring something concrete to the people that you're actually advocating for or sharing the story to. So yeah, number one, I would say definitely include the beneficiaries and tell the people, so that they have a chance to express. And then, of course, in terms of being fair on people, pictures can sometimes misguide the reading of a subject. So to be careful with how pictures are taken. It can sometimes be derogative. It can sometimes be so to bear that in mind. It's a foreign organization coming in at times. So to bear in mind the context that you're responding to. And again, that's where I say bring in the people themselves to talk about their situation. I think maybe that answers the question.
That's pretty spot on. Thank you very much. And this point you make around pictures misguiding, or misrepresenting the story, I do hope that Steve and maybe Jennifer will reflect on it when we get to the second part of this conversation around, how powerful pictures are and how it could sort of misguide what people think. But I also would like you to build up a bit on this content of we all own the story. And I would ask in this way. in the work that you do, you cover not just the water crisis, but the health crisis, food insecurity, climate change, maybe literacy in some parts of the world where you work. And we see how water is at the center, or could be at the center of this conflict and development. So how prominently interconnected would you say these issues are? How, if you had to make this connection, how would you say they are really, really connected?
Yeah, they're very connected, very connected. And I guess I think one of the problems sometimes that we see, I say for those who are providing funding, etc., is to really look at the water scarcity, or so when it targets, or it has an impact on all different sectors, on the health sector, on the food sector, on the infrastructure sector, on all different. So it's a multi-sectorial, it has an impact on a different amount of sectors. So it's essential to understand, for example, I'll give an example, in health. We have a lot of waterborne related diseases, a lot of vector-borne related diseases that are all due to potentially management of water, scarcity of water. So it's important that we don't consider water as just a supply, as just a punctual activity. It actually has an impact on the society, on the health, on the infrastructure, on the future of food security for a country. So it needs to consider all of these different factors. On security as well, it may have an impact. Maybe you have a person who is walking to a borehole and she has to walk past military checkpoints, and then she's facing sexual violence, for example. So it has a security impact on certain people. So it has an impact on all different sectors. So when we're thinking about activities, we should be considering all these different areas.
Great. And I like how you sort of bridge first, the funders part as people who fund project organizations who work in places where these issues are. What do they think? How do they approach this issue? And on the other end will then be the journalists that report the stories. How do they keep in the picture these different, so-called different sectors or different forms of issues, and find that connection together? Let me move to Karma here, and maybe just bridging from that point of security that you made mention of, having to walk distances, walking past security checkpoints to get water. And Karma, you've probably seen how handling conflicts intersects with development projects. If you had to tell us from the work you do in the Middle East and North Africa region, the MENA region, how do you see and what are the intersections between handling conflicts and driving development projects, for example, water, or by extension, climate change, food security issues?
Yeah, well, conflicts in the MENA region definitely make it much harder to work on long-term development projects, especially when it comes to water and water management. Conflicts tend to divert resources away from long-term development to immediate crisis management. So this is something that tends to happen. So you need to handle it effectively by integrating conflict-sensitive approaches to development planning, making projects adaptable and accessible, even amidst instability. And here you need the coordination and cooperation between, on different societal levels, with the governments, NGOs, and local communities to be able to navigate and overcome these challenges. But now that we're talking about conflict, and I'd like to mention a point that's really important, that conflict also tends to sideline these issues. And I would like to take Gaza at the moment as an example. I mean, Gaza is going through an incredible, unprecedented water crisis at the moment. Water is contaminated. The water sources are contaminated. There's no access to clean drinking water. The infrastructure is demolished. Sewage is going into the Mediterranean, and and these are really serious problems. Yet, because of conflict, they tend to get sidelined because the focus is on immediate security and human issues. So these serious water issues that affect every aspect of, life. Again, we're talking about, food security, public health, all of these aspects of life tend to be underreported and overlooked because the media and governments are caught into the chaos of the moment. And that's understandable. But, behind these silent crises that, are coming, there are long-term implications that threaten lives and the environment for many years to come. So this is another danger that conflict tends to do. We sideline these extremely important issues. What we need really here is also, responsible journalism that touches on these. They are still human stories and touches on these issues during conflict. Even during conflict, the media plays a huge role in ensuring that these issues are not lost in the background, basically.
Great, thank you very much. And this is where I would ask that you put in the chat if you have questions. I see quite a few, agreements and quite a few comments around people agreeing, for example, around ethical consciousness in water stories. I see comments from Dunia Rauf around water being a key factor in the climate change and how it impacts everything. If you do have specific questions that you want to put forward to any of our resource persons, please use the chat function to do that. Just before we move to that, maybe I turn quickly to Frederick again. And Frederick, I want you to be as practical as possible here. We know that there is actually some risk that come with this work, as journalists and going to the communities and telling these stories, and the political powers trying to push their own notions. Yeah. You cannot take away the fact that there are risks. So what would you offer as practical as possible, and based on the work you've been doing with this network of journalists, what would you offer as effective tips to keep water journalists, or those who will be journalists in the near future? What would you offer as effective tips to keep them going? And what are some of the strong motivations for water communicators in your own sector?
Yeah, thank you so much. It is true. The story about water is so sensitive. It is so sensitive. I just wanted to picture, mentally, how, for example, how sensitive the story of River Nile can be in countries like Egypt, like Ethiopia, like Sudan, like Uganda, like Rwanda. These are sensitive areas, and you as a journalist, when you go to these areas, most probably you're likely to be questioned by your government, the motive of the story you're writing. Why are you writing this story? It's a good story, but why are you writing it? Why don't you leave it? Those are the questions that you're likely to face as a journalist or a communicator. But what we have seen over time, because we have been writing stories about River Nile, for example, as a transboundary resource, we have seen that when you use data speaks louder and safer than confrontation. Because you see, data is readily available. You can, for example, team up with a scientist, or you can find it, at different websites or different sources, and you use it. It's like they're saying that the truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. You have data there. It speaks louder and safer than confrontation. So if I were you as a journalist, I'd venture into data journalism and see if I can use data to tell these stories. Also, if we did collaborative journalism, because most of these resources, the rivers, the lakes, the waterways, most of these are transboundary. They cross from one country to another. They are transboundary. So you wonder, why would we as journalists compete for this story, compete to write about these stories? Why don't we collaborate? So if we collaborated, you would be able to write what is happening in another country. You don't go there, but you write about it. But also you can share a byline. It's not about the byline. You see, it's about what you write in the story. It's about the idea. It's about what you want to bring out in the story. So, for example, I can, share. I can collaborate with someone in Egypt. I get info. I give it to her, or I give it to him. She publishes the story, and the story comes out without my byline because it's not about the byline. So then, for you as a journalist, you'll be a winner. The story will come out. But also, we as journalists, as communicators, we need to build, bigger and stronger networks that can help us, in times when we have faced challenges. For most of these, networks, they extend, different services, like, legal services. They extend, counseling services. I mean, it's very important to belong somewhere. Someone will come and, comfort you when you're in problems. Well, the last one is that I would want to talk about is, assess the risk. If it is bigger than you can take, just leave the story. Your life is bigger than the story. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for being honest there. Assess the risk.
Yeah.
It's big, I live it. But one quick question for you. What keeps you, Frederick? What keeps you going in, water journalism?
Yeah, I see. If for me, at the beginning of my profession as a water journalist, I wanted to serve my community. I come from Western Uganda, where you find we are close to Lake Victoria. You have the African Great Lakes in the south. You have River Nile in north. Then you have Congo Forest. So then, me as a journalist, I have a role to, contribute towards conservation of these water resources, and I can do that through, journalism. I can do that through my stories, and that's what I'm doing.
Great, thank you very much. I'll sort of yield the floor to the participants here and take some of the questions that we've got, some in the chat. But if you do want to speak up, maybe you can use the raise hand function, and we'll see how much time would allow. Maybe one or two questions. But one question I'll take is from Jonah Fisher. She's asking, what's your take on the emerging citizen journalism, influencers and bloggers who tell the story before water communicators tell the real story? Interesting question. Who would like to take on this? Karma, Frederick, Angelica? What's your take?
I didn't get the question well. Could you ask
it again? Absolutely. Yeah. What's your take on emerging citizen journalism? And this is journalism from influencers and bloggers and TikTokers who tell the stories before the water communicators come to tell the quote-unquote real stories.
Well, for me, I am not, threatened by those who tell the stories fast. I mean, the audience will always come to the source of news that they can trust. And if we as journalists or communicators do what we're doing professionally, we build trust within our audience, the audience is likely to go to those who break it fast and find it unprofessional. And then they come to us to verify. And the more they verify, the more they trust us. In the future, they will come to us fast than, going to those who break it fast. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And that's sort of one of the points that I think it's Anne who had put in the chat also around how sort of this citizen journalism could be like the channel to draw water journalists to then come and do the real thing, as you put it. One other question, and maybe I'll direct this to Karma, since you've worked a little bit around the Latin American region. When we talk about water as an instrument of politicization, or even as an instrument of pressure in terms of war from our continent, such as what is happening in the Gaza Strip, how can we sensitize Latin American readers so that they can be more receptive and understand the seriousness of the situation?
Yeah, well, I can't really speak for Latin America. I'm not an expert, but I've heard, of course, about, the issues that they have there, which are quite seriously politicized. I would say in the MENA region, it is not politicized in the same way. That then they're not trying to shut down the stories, but they're using water as a publicity stunt more than anything. Having a press release saying, we came up with this strategy or that strategy, but really not bothering to communicate those strategy to those who are affected, or making any effort to discuss, inclusivity when it comes to protecting those who are vulnerable and at the front lines of water scarcity, and it was serious water scarcity issues. But yeah, I cannot speak for Latin America. I would be, it's not really my area. But yeah, it is not as dangerous as it is over there. Maybe some of my colleagues could speak about that.
Great. Thank you very much. Angelica, I don't know if you have any reflections on that or any of the two questions I asked earlier.
I think on the Latin America, well, I think I can see Jennifer keen to say something as well on Latin America. But for me on Latin America, and I think on any other country, sometimes it's difficult for people to, if they haven't been to a different context, to actually relate to the context. So I think to see also, to link the context of Colombia or Brazil or any of these countries to, or Venezuela, to the context in a way that it's not, to show that it's not so separate. You could use climate change, you can use the political situation, you can use a very similar situation that people are going through in Latin America to the situation in maybe not necessarily Gaza, but in other contexts in MENA, or so to try and link the two. But I think in Latin America, we also have a lot of issues concerning water that can in some way be linked. And then with the first question that you said was quite interesting, the local people responding to and communicating. I think it's really important, actually. It brings a lot more responsibility to the journalists to actually make an effort to not only publicize in one particular area, but to actually cover different areas. And I think we should capitalize on those different individuals, young people who are coming out to express their points of view. And I think the responsibility lies on the reader to actually decide, what is it that I think? Why do I think the way I think, etc. The responsibility always lies on us and how we actually take the information. And for those people coming up with the information, like young people, every different types of areas, it puts a lot of pressure on all of us to make a valid judgment if needs be.
And I connect this with, collaborative storytelling, some of the terms we've used today, allyship journalism, around the fact that it is people who are close to these issues that can be responsible to put it out and say, hey, this is happening. And then we as water journalists with skills, with, the training we have, go out there, you sort of get the real story out of it. I see Clemencia's question around if anyone trains community members to become their own journalists. There are quite some comments, but I know, Frederick, this is part of what you do within the network. Or do you have platforms that you would say could provide trainings to people to become journalists on their own? I know Water and Communications, this workshop series is one, but if we look in terms of long-term structural umbrella organizations, do you have any that comes to mind?
Yeah, that's true. So the organization I started, Water Journalists Africa, has a network of journalists spread across Africa, almost 3,000 journalists. But Underwater Journalists Africa have different initiatives. One of them is InfoNile. Now, InfoNile is in the Nile Basin. There are 11 countries in the Nile Basin. So in there, we train journalists. We give them journalism grants. And also we link them with scientists to co-produce knowledge. So we have seen over time, like 7 years ago, before you would not find journalism associations, you'd find a few stories in the media, but we have seen these stories now coming up, journalists using data to tell stories. And this is what we want. We are training them to tell stories using geojournalism, techniques, and they're using them. Yeah. It's true. Yeah.
Thank you. If you can put in the chat also any relevant link, that would be very much appreciated. Okay. I know that Jennifer and Steve are brimming with things to say, but we'll still come back to you, Kama, Frederick, and Angelica, just before we close out, when we take the final rounds of questions. I also see that the chat is very much buzzing with, not just questions, but also answers from professionals. And thank you for that. Please keep engaging using the chat function. But this is where I want to say thank you again to our first round of speakers and turn the mic to Steve, Jennifer, and also Alejandro as we move into the second part of the conversation. Not a second part per se, it's just a continuation, if you would say it that way. But before I do that, I just think to recap some of the very important points that you gave, that Karma, Frederick, and Angelica gave earlier. One was around using data to tell stories. You also talked about collaborative journalism. You talked about moving beyond the byline, and I think that connects with what Jodette was sharing with us last Thursday around how do we move from buzzwords to buy-in and also action on the ground. Thank you also for introducing at least me to this concept of allyship journalism, and also to Angelica and Frederick for talking, sort of expatiating on the role of intentionality and we as journalists being deliberate in reaching out to where the stories are. Moving on, thank you and welcome again to Jennifer and Alejandro as well as Steve. Just to recap, I don't think I read your profile earlier. Oh, yes, I did. But just to put it in very simple terms again, Steve is joining us from Practical Action. He's a chartered PR practitioner and media specialist. He's worked on the Turkana project in Kenya, which was supported by Greenforce Foundation, the same organization that supports the Water in Communications workshop series for the 4th year now. And then we have Jennifer and Alejandro joining us from Mexico. They both produced the Spanish documentary, The City Without Water, where they exposed our unchecked urban development in Mexico City that was led by powerful real estate trust, was causing serious harm to the people. And getting into the conversation right now, I will start with Steve. Steve, the focus today has been around telling meaningful water stories. And one of such stories, the Turkana project in Kenya, is in Turkana, Kenya, where Practical Action, with support from Greenforce Foundation, installed boreholes for the farmer communities in an arid area. I know you're very proud of this project and how you helped them to sort of grow more sustainable food, how you were able to send kids to school, get better sanitation for the young girls. But there are also many local projects like this. But unfortunately, some of these projects stay local. They don't go out there. So my question to you is, what strategies did you put in place to bridge this local and global gap? That's my first question to you. How were you able to move away from doing this project in local Kenya, a local city in Kenya, to then become a global story featured on, Bloomberg TV and on other reporting platforms?
Yeah, thanks so much, Shay. I think that the discussion around water today has been quite exciting, and I'm more than excited to add my own voice to the key issues around water. The Turkana project that Practical Action implemented is one project that I'm very proud to talk about, because it's happening at an area we usually call the cradle of humanity. I don't know if many of us have heard of Turkana, but Turkana is often termed as the cradle of humanity. And this is an area where you would say that it has potential to have water, but there's no water. When I say it has the potential to have water, it means that there's water is available in Turkana, but however, the technology or the capacity to bring out the water to serve the communities is not there. And that is where we come in. And that is where Greenforce came in to support the work that we do. So our work in Turkana basically looked at providing boreholes. Apart from boreholes, it also decided that, look, there was a need to improve the sanitation, because many of the community people, usually they get water from dugout wells that is connected to the river. And most of these water sources are usually not very safe. And so we're looking at how do we make water available to them. We had to utilize the power of the sun. That is, we dug out water from the ground, build boreholes, and then we use the solar power to pump the water out such that people will be able to benefit from it. I'm just giving a background to before I come to your main issue. Now, and you would also realize that majority of the people that go in to fetch the water usually are women or children. That means that most of them spend like 15 kilometers to go and look for water. That is like spending virtually half of the day or the entire day at most. The children who go to fetch the water would not be able to go to school, unlike you and I. So we're doing such a great job in Turkana, but how do we ensure that this story does not stay local? And that is a problem with not just practical action, but with many more stories that journalists do, or with many more projects that NGOs deliver on the ground, yet nobody gets to hear about it. But the issue is that we realize that no, we don't have to do the usual thing. Oh, we have this fantastic technology that we are delivering to Turkana. No, we don't have to do the usual thing. We have to tell the human stories. So we don't focus on the technology, but we look at what has it changed? What key problem are we trying to resolve? So you look at the fact that somebody treks like 15 kilometers to look for water. When there's water available, what happens? He or she doesn't have to trek all the way to go and get the water. So that is the human impact of it. Then we'd also look at, in terms of children, instead of children going to look for water, now they would be in school. We look at that aspect. Building the boreholes would mean that people don't drink from very unhygienic sources. So the sanitation bit and improving the health of people comes in at that bit. So we are looking at the impact, the change that it makes. But doing that was not easy, because it's the usual stories. Everyone pitches to the media. I can assure you that it took us 2 good years to get that story, the Turkana story, into the Bloomberg Future with Hannah Fry. And I'm excited that today over 1 million people have viewed the story, the Bloomberg story that showcased our work in Turkana. So all that we did was to reach out to what we call a production company and highlight these human impact stories. That is the impact, and not talk about the technology. Of course, everyone does boreholes. Everyone knows how to use solar power and all that. But what has it changed? What sort of change has it brought into the lives of these people that many people are not aware of? And earlier they were talking about conflict. I can assure you that a few years ago, oil was the biggest source of conflict in the world. But that is not the case anymore. Water is gradually taking the place as the biggest cause of global conflict. And Turkana is not the only thing, because conflict usually happens when there's struggle for limited water resources. So if there's a river, the pastoralists from one community wants to have ownership over it. Another also wants to have ownership of it. So there's that conflict. Across Sudan, across Burkina Faso, and many other African countries that we haven't talked about, water is a source of conflict. Yeah.
Permit me to jump in there, because you sort of bridge the conversation to what I'll then, my next question, which is directed at Jennifer. Jennifer, in your article, which we've put in the comments so people can also check it out, you talked about, or you sort of made clear the fact that water does not stand alone. Just what Steve is saying, that there's usually this connection, and you made that connection with real estate, you made the connection with waste management, with pollution, as well as with the cost of living in Mexico City, while still reporting on water issue. So my question to you is, how do you bring into prominence other social issues while you're focusing on a water story? Because like we've said, it doesn't stand alone. We've established this from the first set of speakers, and now Steve just made that very clear. So how do we bring into prominence, into the fore, other social issues while we still, keep the focus on water, or in our water stories?
Thank you. Okay, well, I think that, it's watching, observing, and we all drink water, we all need water, we're all made of water. So it's like paying attention to what we live when we suffer from scarcity or inequity, or when we are the ones who are generating this, and the ones who are being asked, because some other people cannot have access to the water that we do have access to. So what we did with Alejandro, City Without Water, Ciudad Sin Agua, we had 2 actors who were competing for this resource. So I wanted to share, in the case of Ciudad de Mexico, I come from a smaller city and I moved to Ciudad de Mexico a couple of years ago. And what I noticed is that since there are so many people here, we are sort of competing for everything, competing for space, and space is time, and time is money, and money is access to resources, amongst those, water. So I think that competition that derives from the amount of people that we have in the city and that concentration of resources, economic resources in this case, that we're giving access to water, was what made me connect all of these pieces. And another thing that we see in big cities, but not only in big cities nowadays, is the fact of having access to housing. So I think that this place could gather all of those issues, and these were matters that individually Alejandro and I were already seeing in other places. We had worked on issues that were related to water, or without making that connection specifically to water. And when we got together and started discussing about it, we could do like that connection. So I think that it has to do with the paying attention and focusing on what hurts us or our communities. And I wish Alejandro could also talk about these issues, that he as a citizen and as someone who is constantly going to see this place where we have this big urban development in Mexico City. He was seeing the story of this area and how we did, first by focusing on the actor that had his right because he had been there for longer, and then this important economic actor like Fibra One. In the specific case of the investigation that Jennifer Gonzalez and I did about the big constructions that were using the water in City of Mexico, I would say that those were three very important issues to elaborate the investigation as what happened in the video, the script itself. And first, we read all we could about the story and identifying all of the different fragments on this regard. For instance, here where we go to the Hoco, we could see that in the 19th century there were insurgencies during the Mexican Revolution in the 19th century, and there were still some of those families there. In the second place, we talked and interviewed older people in the area, in the Coco neighborhood, to get to know their social environment, and then to get to know the story better, we got closer to archives that were shared from the families. And what we could find within these archives was to get to see who they are, how important they are for the communities. And in the end, for this investigation, it might seem as if we hadn't used that much of that information, but it shared the hurtful acts of the company as Fibra One, which is a very strong company in Latin America and in Mexico. And we could see different areas with buildings next to the originary peoples.
Record now, and it may not be clear because
if I could just ask, and this is also building on a comment that I think it was Frederick who mentioned earlier. I will mute Victoria, but it was Frederick who mentioned earlier around confrontations, and I imagine with this kind of publication and storytelling, you must have faced some, backlash. So how do you, and by extension, other journalists in the room or other water storytellers, how should we take into account the risk of backlash from the exposure or from the results that our work, delivers? Because there is a risk that it ends up being that, okay, the government or some powerful actors will then retaliate instead of taking in the issue and then bringing about progress. So how do we keep this at the back of our mind when we when we do our work?
Something that we did was the risk analysis. As a matter of fact, Alejandro will be addressing this, but one of the things that gave me much learnings is that we have to keep in mind that the entrance of this big construction development in that specific quarter was fracturing community relationships. There was a division between the neighbors or some of the original people and the original, for example, the municipal authorities of the quarter of Joko. Hence, part of the strategy concerning that risk assessment was to be extremely clear and transparent with all the people that we spoke with. And that reporting things unavoidably when we got there as external actors, well, of course, we were affecting these relationships. And maybe, we were focusing on all these issues that they had not thought about before. And, we reminded each other, Alejandro and I, that once we published the report, we were going to leave the site and we would enjoy some sort of protection, because we belonged to a very important newspaper in Mexico City. So in a certain way, we had the support simply because you're part of that newspaper. Well, it gave us some sort of protection. Well, the people that live in that specific quarter, they're going to continue living there. They're going to continue seeing these issues. And now, with the repercussions of addressing this publicly, so we always try to be extremely clear with what we wanted to do, what we were doing as well. What Jennifer is saying, it's important. It's important to say that this large consortium, it's an entrepreneurial consortium, had important networks, and these networks included the co-opting of people within that specific poor quarter for things to work out. They were saboteurs. Hence, in that sense, concerning that big consortium, let me say that Jennifer and myself, before carrying out this research, we had already researched this big company. It's called Fibra Uno. So we knew how powerful it was, and concerning the risk analysis to be able to give a dimension concerning the structure, well, we held contact with the legal authority of that quarter to avoid boycotting an issue that was being taking place against this company. When we knew it was, we were going against this big trust fund in Latin America. It belongs to very powerful entrepreneurs and politicians. And all these people allowed them and gave them these permits. And they had a PR strategy that had to do with environmental agencies and other people, and they received funding. So, they were blocking negative publications concerning this big stealth. And we spoke about that. In summary, this company figura is like a hydra, because remember, they're like a hydrant. They have many heads.
Yeah.
Thank you so much indeed, Alejandro. Thank you, Jennifer, for this insight. And I see quite, some interesting questions in the chat that I would love to take on. But let me come to you, Steve, very quickly. Alejandro made a point when she was speaking around how, the religious leaders are very important actors, and how the priests in this Mexico City played a very important role in giving life to the work they were doing. And my question, this brings us to one of the pillars when we think about climate reporting or even water reporting in this context, and that is trust. Yeah. To build trust. So what are your thoughts around how we can use, or maybe I should just ask you, and because for you to work in Turkana, it means you're able to build trust with the people and get them to know that, hey, you're here for them and, to provide solutions to them. I would then ask you very clearly that how can journalists leverage the same? How can journalists who are having issues gaining the trust of the communities, what can they do differently? How did you build trust? How can we build trust with the community? And who are the other actors that we can sort of, work with to build trust? For example, there's a question from Kindness around how can we get, instead of just journalists versus governments, is there a possibility of journalists and governments co-creating something, for example? So my question to you is, how can we build trust when we tell what the story is, especially with the important actors?
Yeah, just before I go that, if you permit, I'll just take a few seconds to tackle something quickly on the first question. That is, how do journalists bridge the gap in terms of the local to global? So I think that one thing that I wanted to mention before I ended was the fact that we need to connect the local stories to the global challenges such as climate change, women, gender empowerment, and all this. And then most reporting too must also ensure that we incorporate strong visuals and data, and as well as highlighting the experiences. Having said that, I think that, of course, trust is very, very important when you are looking at climate reporting. However, most journalists, from experience, most journalists go to the communities as reporters and not as people who are listening. And you see, practically, we have a model. We call ourselves a grassroots organization. Grassroots because we do not think that we do not operate the top-down approach, but we start from the bottom. And that is the more reason why for the people that we work with, the community people, we don't call them beneficiaries, we call them project participants, because we want their voice to be heard. And we want their voices to be heard, for them to feel that they are part of the process and all that. So one of the things that we do is the fact that we listen and listen. We don't hold all the solutions. Most reporters or even communicators do not know it all. So you need to listen to the people and let them feel that you are there to understand their problems and find solutions to them. But if you go there as a reporter, then there will be a problem. Secondly, you need to be very transparent. You need to be very clear in your mind exactly what you can do. Most of us overpromise and underdeliver, and that is a problem. So if you go to Turkana, you say that, okay, I'm doing this report and I'm expecting that it will resolve A, B, and C. At the end of the day, if it doesn't do that, then the trust is lost. So you need to be very transparent of what you can do. Then you need to also, one thing that we also realize that you need to deliver tangible results. So if we go to the community that we say that, look, we engage them, we say we want to build a borehole that will help you, that will prevent you from walking 15 kilometers to access water. We need to deliver that tangible results in the short term, such that people are. So just like that same model, journalists must build that same level of trust with the local people, because if you do not build that trust with them and you go and do the reporting, it may not have their buy-in. So that is the first point of call that I think that we should look at.
Great, thank you very much. And this is where I would sort of, open up the floor a little bit and this will be we taking questions directed at all our 5 brilliant resource persons. We've been speaking with Karma, we've been speaking with Frederick, or just to do a little bit of recap about who my guests are. Angelina works with Doctors Without Borders, and she's been sharing with us insights from the ground and some of the work she's been doing in different parts of the world. We also had Jennifer and Alejandro, who produced the Spanish documentary, The City Without Water. The link has been shared in the chat a few times, so feel free to look at it. And in that documentary, they shared how powerful real estate trust, enabled by government inaction, were causing serious harms to local community. We've also had insights from Steve. Steve works with Practical Action, and he shared with us the work he did, or how his work in Turkana, or pretty much how he was able to get the local story in Turkana to get to a global platform, and what that means. There are still a few questions for you, Steve. I'll come to that in a bit. And Frederick is a Uganda-based water journalist and geojournalist that founded the Water Journalist Africa organization that runs InfoNile, and it's shared with us also the need for us to have this umbrella network or this umbrella organizations to keep us going. And maybe my own last questions to you all, if you could take it in very quick responses. What keeps you going as a water journalist? We've talked about the risk, we've talked about the challenges, we've preferred, very clear ideas to help us do our work better, but it's also challenging if we're being truthful. So what keeps you going as a water journalist? I'll start with Steve, followed by Frederick, and then Alejandro.
Yes, thanks, Shay. Yeah, so for me, as somebody who works within the water sector, I think that what keeps me going is about the challenges that our work, the stories that we tell, help resolve. Because I can assure you that this story that we had that was captured by Bloomberg and being viewed over a million people. I had many people writing to me and asking me, what is the story in Turkana? Is it possible to visit?
I would want you to keep it very simple. The fact that your work has results and you can see the results. I'll take that.
Yes, I think, let me say that at the end of the day, once it has the impact and there's change in the community, I think that's what motivates me more than any other thing.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you, Steve. Frederick, let's turn to you very quickly.
Yeah, so I write about the resource I depend on. See, so I'm not just the writer of the story, but I'm also a consumer of the resource, and also I am also part of the story. Even when I'm writing about it, I am also part of it. So it keeps me going because I see now more benefits.
Got it. Alejandro, I'll turn to you, and Jennifer next. What keeps you going? What are your thoughts around how water is used to support digital infrastructures and technologies?
I am not getting you well. I need to, probably you can ask me again or something.
Yes, gladly. Christina is asking, she says that our world is more connected than ever, and that we have sort of a broadened reach right now. So our question is, what do you think our responsibilities as communicators should be when it comes to how water is used to support digital infrastructure? I guess she's talking around how consumption of water is supporting digital infrastructure. What should be our role as communicators in speaking to these issues?
Yeah, well, I didn't get you well, but a few words I heard from you. I think we have a role to play as writers, as communicators, to bring out the stories of how water is used. We have a role as people who should be there to research, write these stories, and people look at us as the ones that would bring these issues in the limelight. So right. Yeah, you have to go ahead. Take an extra mile and research, write, and bring to the limelight. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. I wonder if there are any other questions in the chat. I see a few people agreeing with you. Marcos Sotelo agrees with Steve that before being journalists, we are people and we're part of the community. And I see that in in some of the comments you gave around what keeps you going, and that we must be able to put ourselves in other people's shoes. A few other questions I will get to in a sec, and this is directed to you, Jennifer and Alejandro. Mexico City is a mega city, and it's characterized by its population of immigrants from all over the country. How can we communicate the urgency of reorganizing population distribution and share that it is no longer possible to sustain basic services like water for more than 23 million residents? I'll put the question also in the chat so you can reflect on it. Another question is from Ikechukwu Okuze, is asking, how are you integrating artificial intelligence in your respective water journalism? Quite interesting question. And from Kindness, I'm just taking this question, so take notes and you can respond to them. Kindness is asking, I think I mentioned this earlier, is there a possibility in the future of water communication where there is a collaboration between authorities, the government, the local people, and journalists, instead of it being a case of journalists versus the authorities? So the floor is yours, my guests, please.
Can I?
Yeah, can I go fast?
Okay.
Can I go fast?
Yes, make it quick.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about someone who talked about artificial intelligence, and it's very important to think about how you take advantage of artificial intelligence. You as a journalist, think about how you can use open source intelligence to tell stories. If you're talking about stories of climate change and how it has affected, for example, a river or lake, how can you take advantage of artificial intelligence, for example? How can you take advantage of satellite imagery to tell these stories, to show us? How can you take the advantage of different tools in data journalism to make sure that you visualize and we see, we don't just tell us words or sound, but we see. I mean, it's very important to venture into artificial intelligence, and we are doing that. Yeah.
Got it. Steve, you are going to chip in.
I was going to say that when it comes to highlighting issues of water, it is not and should not be government versus journalist. That should not be the case. It should be, how do we work together to highlight the key issues? So the journalist or the communicator must go in from a place where they would want to collaborate and work with the government to highlight the issues for the people. But if you go in and write a story or highlight a story as a criticism of their work, then there will be a challenge. So in Turkana, for instance, we are partners with the local community because we feel that they are part of the solution. So that should inform whatever story that you tell. Because if you go there and criticize, you will not have.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you very much. And
But also, just
let me talk Jennifer. Yeah, Frederick. There was
Yeah.
a question around. Let me take it again. It's around Mexico being a mega city, and how do we communicate the urgency of reorganizing population distribution, and also stating clearly that it's not possible to sustain basic services like water for a community of 23 million people. Quite debatable, but Jennifer, this is posed at you.
Thank you. I think that this is a very complex issue because we go into the rights. As we have the right to have access to water, we also have rights to have mobility and to live where we can and where we want. So we would need to consider that issue as well. But I think that the best way in which I can think that communicating about this is possible is by investigating, by going to the communities, by talking to these groups of immigrants to get to understand who can understand better than them, which are the issues that they have regarding these resources, how they are trying to solve these issues, and then talk to specialists to understand whether it's really necessary to redistribute the population or maybe redistribute the wealth, because this goes also to other issues like access to housing, mobility itself, because why are we leaving one place and getting to the other? why are we leaving that area? So I think that that's important to explain. I think that would be my answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very spot on. And we have to wrap up now. But let me turn to you to give your closing remarks, Angelica, Karma. And in giving your closing remarks, if you could reflect on this question from Orlando, how do you make your stories believable and impactful to the readers? What methodology should you keep in mind? Angelica, please.
Okay. Okay. No, I think definitely to speak to the people on the ground and to reflect their stories is number one. And then number two, to make it impactful is actually to bring some solutions to your article. Not only leave it to the criticisms, but also bring some practical solutions that will make sense for the community or for the country. I think those are the two practical suggestions I would have.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And Kama, closing thoughts?
Yes, I couldn't agree more about the solutions. I think this is a very good way of engaging people, not just telling them the problems, but giving them solutions that have worked elsewhere. Also telling the story in a simple, relatable language that they would understand. As well as providing information. We're not scientists. We're not giving science reports. We're providing human stories that people can resonate deeply with the people and comes out of their own context. And yes, that's
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Karma. I'm really grateful for the quality of this conversation. We could keep it going for another 10, 20, maybe 1 hour. But this is where I get to say a very big thank you to you all. For being very engaged, for being very interactive, and many, many thanks to my guests today. I've been speaking with Jennifer and Alejandro, Steve Kubate. I've been speaking with Angelica Ojuele, and then Frederick Muringa, as well as Kama Abu Sharif. Thank you so much. I will turn the mic in a bit to Cecile, where she then shares some things to keep in mind. But I just want to say that this is an ongoing conversation, and this training is not, or sort of learning does not end. It is continuous. So keep in touch. Look out for the World Water Week itself. Feel free to check out other sessions that will be coming in the coming days or in the days ahead. And just, I think it was Frederick who also shared the importance of being part of a network. So find networks that you think you should belong to help you do your work better. Leverage data. That's one of the insights from today's conversation. Find ways to leverage data to do your work. Collaborate with other people, and see yourself as part of the story and not, don't see yourself different from the story. And these are just some of the insights that I take with me from this conversation. I know you're taking with you also different key points, and I hope you will keep it in mind in the work that you do, and that this will be a very central point to shaping water journalism and helping you do the work that you do even in better ways. I'll turn to Cecilia to wrap up.
Thanks a lot, Shay. And as you say, thanks a lot to all the panelists. It's been a very interesting session. And as you can see from the comments in the chat, a lot of appreciation for your insights. So very, very grateful for your time and your insights. I just wanted to close off by inviting you to Thursday's session, where we'll have a very practical workshop and we will travel to the future. So if you are really interested and curious about that, please join us on Thursday at 2 p.m. There was some questions about the recordings. They will be available soon, like in the next few days or something. And I shared the link to the Google Drive with the slides and notes from each sessions. As usual, I'm available on email if you have any follow-up questions. And yeah, big thank you to everyone, to Shay and to all the speakers. And I look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Bye, everyone.